To understand everything about the creation and use of atomic bombs in World War II, you can read my book O Atomo como Arma, which is available on Amazon and also at the We Club store. If you want this book here autographed by me for you, just send an email to saladagera@gmail.com with your zip code so I can calculate the shipping cost. Today we're going to talk about technologies, some of the most important technologies that were developed during the World War II, and that even today, more than 80 years after the conflict, continue to shape the world we live in. Stay with us. My list of the 10 most important technologies was based on how these technologies are used in our everyday world, in our civilian lives. Of course, there are numerous technologies developed during World War II that directly impacted and continue to impact only the world of warfare and the military. For example, the assault rifle or the heavier tanks, right? Which gave rise to the MBTs. And if by any chance my list is different from yours, feel free to let us know here in the comments section. Number 1 on my list is a very important British invention that prevented the German invasion of the country in 1940, the radar. Radar was developed in Europe at the very end of the 1930s, more specifically by the British, to be able to detect from a distance the formations of aircraft that would come against their country to drop bombs or carry out other types of attacks. In 1940, the United Kingdom was the only country in the world that actually had a nationwide chain of radars to protect its own territory. And this chain of radars, the chain home, was extremely important for the British victory in the Battle of Britain because it allowed the scarce resources of the British Royal Air Force at that time to be precisely directed against the formations of German bombers that crossed the English Channel to attack targets like London, Coventry, Liverpool, and other major British cities. In the final years of World War II, radar was universally adopted in warfare, with applications not only in the air, but also at sea, and even by powers that were technologically a step behind, like Italy and also Japan. And today, as we well know, radar is ubiquitous all over the world, controlling air traffic and also serving many other applications. Number 2 on my list is jet propulsion, which was also developed back in the late 1930s, but found its ideal testing ground in World War II for its expansion and improvement. Jet propulsion is quite different from the traditional propulsion of the time, right, which were propeller engines, and it was introduced into combat starting in 1942. With the arrival of the Messerschmitt Me-262, this plane, and also the Gloucester Meteor, which was being developed in parallel over in Great Britain, were the 2 jet aircraft that saw combat in the skies over Europe between 1944 and 1945. And from this introduction of jet aircraft, which gave combat pilots much higher top speeds, came an entire revolution of the second half of the 20th century in air transportation, not only national but also international and intercontinental. So today we have aircraft capable of crossing entire oceans in just a few hours, relatively speaking, with good safety. Precisely because of those events 80 years ago in the technological race to achieve a definitive advantage in fighter aviation. Number 3 on my list is penicillin, the first fungus that was used as an antibiotic. It was an accidental discovery by Alexander Fleming, still in the early 1930s, which was so accidental that he ended up abandoning it for many years. Until his articles, his preliminary studies were found by a group of biologists from a British university. The result of this was that at the beginning of World War II, these biologists wrote a report for the British government, showing that this medication was potentially revolutionary in treating combat wounds of British soldiers. Therefore, it received an urgent stamp from Prime Minister Winston Churchill for its funding and development. With the entry of the United States into World War II, American money also came in. So the United States government funded no less than 16 major laboratories across the country for the large-scale production of penicillin. The result of this was that, starting in 1943, doses of penicillin began to be available on the American and British front lines in sufficient quantity to treat the most severe cases of infection due to combat injuries. And this use of penicillin in World War II was responsible for drastically reducing the number of Allied casualties from infectious diseases, and of course, also from combat injuries. Penicillin, after the war, became the first major antibiotic to be spread throughout the world, revolutionizing the treatment of wounds and diseases up to the present day. Number 4 on our list, I'm going back to aviation, and this time I'm going to talk about commercial aviation as a whole. And of course, commercial aviation emerged at the end of World War I, not at the end of World War II. But at the end of World War I, airplanes were still largely made of wood and fabric, and they were fragile, small planes that couldn't carry many passengers. So air travel between the two world wars was an extremely limited and expensive activity. But with World War II, the establishment of giant aircraft factories and aeronautical technology, already changing the construction of airplanes to an entirely metal structure, meant that the number of transport planes available at the end of the conflict was so large, and those assembly lines so extensive and so richly equipped were quickly modified to produce civilian models. Just to give you an idea, the transport plane that really created commercial aviation after World War II was the twin-engine Douglas DC-3. That plane, in its civilian version, had only 600 units manufactured, but its military version, the Douglas C-47, had no less than 16,000 units produced. And a good part of that number was simply converted for civilian use at the end of World War II. So thanks to the expansion of aviation during that conflict, today we have a very robust and relatively accessible commercial aviation for almost everyone. Number 5 on my list is nuclear energy. And although the atomic bomb developed during World War II is a military application, to this day, exclusively, of course, the generation of nuclear energy is a byproduct of the atomic bomb program, because to build an atomic bomb, initially, a team of physicists at the University of Chicago, led by Enrico Fermi, built a nuclear reactor in 1942. And although the priorities of World War II dictated that all research should focus on the development of the nuclear weapon, all the basic knowledge already existed for the construction of a reactor for electric power production. So soon after the end of World War II, that accumulated knowledge was redirected to the production of electric power in the form of new nuclear power plants. So today, we have nuclear power plants in several countries around the world, including here in Brazil, with the group of nuclear plants in Angra dos Reis. And although here in Brazil the percentage of nuclear energy generation is still quite small, in other countries it is actually the majority. Let's go to number 6 on the list with the development of rockets, right? Because in World War II, the first operational liquid-fueled rockets were created. And although we can relate this invention by the German Werner von Braun originally to missiles, right, a military application actually, those same liquid-propelled rockets were modified in the immediate post-war period to also be used for scientific purposes, launching small scientific payloads into space, remote sensing, and in 1950 they started launching satellites into orbit. So if today you watch a live broadcast of an event on another continent, like, for example, the World Cup, it's because of the network of satellites in space, thanks to the development of rockets back in World War II. Number 7 on my list, helicopters, which also started to appear in the 1930s just before World War II in the form of various prototypes with different designs. But it was during World War II that the Sikorsky Industries over in the United States emerged, with the first helicopter, right? With that helicopter design that we know today, with the tail rotor that stabilizes the aircraft's flight. Immediately after World War II, the helicopter, given its very innovative type of flight, right, which allowed the aircraft to land very precisely in specific spots, also revolutionized the civil aviation market. From then on, we had the ability to transport cargo and passengers to small locations, set up on top of very tall buildings, right? Heliports. The rescue of people in wilderness areas, far from urban centers, and also for policing, surveillance, and actually countless other technologies. The helicopter today is still a very important and irreplaceable flying machine, a result of that technological race of World War II. Now let's go to number 8 on our list with electronic computers. The origin of computers as we use them today lies in the British need to decipher messages from the German encryption systems of the Lawrence and Enigma machines during World War II. This effort led to the creation of a computer called Colossus, which in the last years of the war was able to read German messages even before the Germans themselves could decode them in Europe. But in the United States, another project would go much further. This American project, which eventually became known as ENIAC, would be a large programmable electronic computer. Unlike its predecessors, it could simply be reprogrammed to perform different functions, just like the computers we have today. And although this project was supposed to be ready during the war to initially assist with trajectory calculations for shots, it was only completed in 1946. But it was a project that came directly from the funding of the American war effort. After the war then, all the knowledge of computer engineering slowly began to be transferred to the civilian sector as well. And with the miniaturization of computers throughout the 60s and early 70s, today we have a machine like this in practically every home to help us in our daily lives. Number 9 on my list, microwave technology. In October 1940, a British delegation led by Sir Henry Teazard arrived in the United States, which was supposed to offer the Americans a set of British technologies in exchange for American production capacity to support the British war effort. Among these new technologies was a small, not very impressive device known as the cavity magnetron, a high-power microwave generator. At that time, even the Americans themselves had no idea how it worked. There were many military applications for microwaves during the World War II, but the most interesting event happened in 1945, in the final days of the conflict. An American scientist named Percy Spencer, who worked at Raytheon, was eating some chocolate and put the wrapper in his pocket, and he inadvertently walked near a microwave generator. When he noticed what he described as a strange sensation, he put his hand in his pocket and saw that the chocolate had melted. So he repeated the experiment and found that microwaves were able to agitate the particles inside food and make those particles heat up. The result of this was that in 1947, just 2 years later, the first commercial microwave oven in history appeared. A story everyone knows today, and these appliances are part of our daily lives, heating our meals safely every day. And finally, number 10 on my list is canned luncheon meat. I'm sure that one surprised you, right? Well, canned luncheon meat, also known as canned preserved meat, appeared in the late 1930s in the United States under the brand Spam, which is a contraction of spiced ham. It was a kind of canned meat, low cost, developed for American families to consume during the Great Depression. Without the need for refrigeration, it could last for months on the shelf and was ready to use as soon as it came out of the can. But it was only during World War II, with the huge need to feed millions of soldiers thousands of miles away from the United States, that Spam spread and became what it is today. That's because it was included as a mandatory item in the famous field rations and provided Allied soldiers with protein basically anywhere in the world, something that was much harder for the Axis nations to achieve, since they didn't have this technology. And then, in the immediate post-war period, due to the massive growth of this industry during the conflict, canned ham spread to almost the entire planet. And in some places like Hawaii, it's still considered a delicacy to this day, because there, in that archipelago, where there isn't much space for raising livestock, Spam became the first accessible way for a large part of the population to consume red meat protein. Now tell me, which of these technologies do you think is the most important, and which one do you use the most in your daily life? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to get your signed copy of The Atom as a Weapon, autographed by me for you. Just send an email to War Room with your zip code so I can calculate the shipping.